Welcome to another episode of Unscripted, presented by LeaseLock. In this episode, I'm joined by author Jason Kae. Now, Jason is a longtime multifamily veteran who is passionate about giving up-and-coming leaders a framework to evaluate, build, and repair healthy team cultures. He's so passionate that he's authored the book, Journey to a Rainforest Team Culture. It's a fable that follows the journey of a newly promoted community manager who inherits a dysfunctional site team and is tasked with turning the asset around. Sound familiar to anybody? I've found his framework to be beneficial in helping me process other learnings and just how and when to apply them, something his new course is also helping people and organizations with. And as always, I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and I hope that you will too. But for full transparency, this episode is going to be an audio-only episode because our rookie audio-video coordinator, namely me, got the lighting completely wrong, and it's actually painful to look at. But the conversation with Jason was too good not to share. But before we share it, just a reminder that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of LeaseLock. The content is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice or endorsements. While we strive to ensure that the content is as accurate and up-to-date as possible, LeaseLock makes no representations or warranties of any kind, expressed or implied, regarding the accuracy, completeness, or reliability of the information discussed. The content is provided as is, and LeaseLock assumes no responsibility for any errors or omissions. Listeners should consult with qualified professionals before making any decisions based on the content of this podcast. This podcast may include references to third-party sources, which are provided for convenience and informational purposes only. LeaseLock does not endorse or take responsibility for the accuracy or reliability of any third-party content. In no event shall LeaseLock, its affiliates, or any of its employees, officers, or agents be liable for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, or consequential damages arising out of or in conjunction with the use or the reliance of the content of this podcast. And now, with the highly scripted disclaimer out of the way, let's get unscripted. Jason, thanks for being here. I appreciate you coming in and joining us for the LeaseLock Unscripted podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so for those who don't know, you are an author.
Correct.
I mean, you wrote Journey to a Rainforest Team Culture, which we've had a little bit of this conversation before, and I've known each other for a little bit. So this book struck a chord with me really in a negative way on two different functions. And you're like, great, begin with the negative. Number one, I've always had the dream of writing a book about multifamily.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a book about multifamily, which we'll get into. The other one, I have a degree that focuses on ecology and evolution. So when I saw Rainforest Team Culture, I was like, what on dear God are we talking about? So why don't we actually start there? Why don't we start how you decided to write a book about multifamily and what is a Rainforest Team Culture?
Okay, so I decided to write a book about leadership. So I was a director of learning and development for a big multifamily PMC. During my time as that director of learning and development, I facilitated a lot of leadership classes. I put together leadership programs for that PMC. And what I realized is that there's a gap in content around how to build and sustain high-performing team cultures. What typically managers are given are an individual set of skills, like how to have difficult conversations, how to do goal setting, things of that nature. But they're never given like a holistic framework on here's when you use these skills, here's how you drive a team culture, et cetera, et cetera. So when I was thinking about writing this book, for me as a reader, I really enjoy books like Management Essentials, The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard, and Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so when I was thinking about writing my leadership book, I thought, well, I've got to tell a story because stories are much more engaging for the audience. And when I did, you're supposed to write what you know. And I've been in multifamily for, almost 20 years. And so I've lived the life of the lead character of this. So yeah, most of the stories in there actually happened to either me or somebody that I knew, and I've changed the names to protect the guilty.
The innocent, yes. I will say, having read it, when I read it, it was one of those things where same thing. I literally could put different names to the characters from real life experience in multifamily, which is one of the things I love. But I want to go to something that I was going to talk on a little bit later, but since you brought it up, I kind of got the feeling that this was very much like a Patrick Lencioni style story. Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with Patrick Lencioni, he does it's not a narrative.
Like a fable.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. A fable in completion, and then teaches everything. You decided to go fable chapter, application of the lesson right afterwards. What kind of drove that decision? Talk us through that a little bit.
It was my desire to have it in the Lencioni material. So like I would read those books and I would get all the way through the narrative, and it was only at the end that kind of the concepts were explained. And even then, I wasn't given a chance to reflect on how they impacted my own leadership, how I could apply some of these to my own team culture. And so when I was writing mine, I was like, I need to tell a cohesive story about this journey of this manager who inherits a toxic team culture. And every time there's a pillar within that framework, I need my readers to take a break, to reflect on what they just read, to ask them some very specific and pointed questions about their own leadership or their own team culture, give them an opportunity to write that down before we move on to the next. Because as you know, this book is not long in comparison to other leadership books. It's maybe a 5-hour read total, depending on how fast you read. But a 5-hour book is still a lot to digest at the end. Yeah. And so this gives you an opportunity to take it in 8 or 9 different chunks. It's also a natural stopping place for you to put the book down, go about your daily life, come back, read the next chapter, reflect on that, put it down, come back again. So that's really what drove that framework, is how I like to digest materials. Yeah. And it made sense for me.
Well, and I really like the way it was set up, because I'm a morning reader. So I've got my stack in the morning that I do. And when I sat down and was reading this, it became a part of my morning routine where I was doing a chapter or a lesson a day. Yeah. And even though when I was reading it, I was really an individual contributor. I wasn't leading necessarily a team. I mean, you always lead through kind of influence as an individual contributor. Sure. But it still had that value to me to be able to, as you put it, absorb that story, think about it where I've seen it in my own life, seen it in other teams that I've been a part of. And then, okay, what would I have done differently? What would, now looking at that approach, I kept going back to a property I was running in Seattle. Like there were so many of these stories that came out where it's like, oh yeah, that's Harrison Square. Yeah. That's what that building is. But let's talk through it a little bit. We've talked about it being a narrative and a fable. What is a Rainforest Team Culture, and how do you walk readers through that?
So when I was wanting to tell this story, this is a framework that I use. So like I am a manager. I lead a team of over 30 global employees who do training for product support teams, implementations teams. So this isn't something that kind of I'm putting out there from, a distance. These are things that I do day by day. And so when I thought about how do I communicate this framework to a larger audience to get them to understand, I did research on the difference between employee satisfaction and employee engagement and how those two influence each other. Oftentimes, in my experience, they get kind of blended together, and things like higher purpose get mislabeled as employee satisfaction, or things like pizza parties get mislabeled as employee engagement, right? And they're very different things. So once I figured out that framework of what is employee satisfaction, what is employee engagement, and how do they work together to help build a team culture, I was reading an article on just our environmental challenges, and it was showing me different ecosystems and how they're changing. And what I realized was there are 2 pivotal factors that define each ecosystem. One is how much rain it gets, right, and the other is the temperature, right? A tundra, super low temperatures, very little precipitation. A desert, very little precipitation, but super high temperatures, or super high temperatures, low precipitation. And so when I looked at it, the correlation between employee satisfaction and engagement was like astounding. Temperature is employee satisfaction. You can have a team culture where people are super satisfied. They're very happy with who they work with. They feel like they're, paid a fair amount, et cetera, but they're not engaged. Engagement is that rainfall. And so when I looked at that, it just kind of clicked. And I was like, this framework already exists. It exists in nature. And so I adapted it to team cultures in order to be able to really tell a clear story.
Okay, so you said engagement is temperature. Did I get that right? No, that's backwards.
Engagement is rain.
It's precipitation.
Satisfaction is temperature.
Okay, so let's start with the rain side of it. Okay, so how do you kind of define precipitation in the book? What are the elements of that?
So there's an acronym for each section.
Right.
Satisfaction is TEMP, T-E-M-P, and engagement is RAIN, R-A-I-N. For the engagement portion, RAIN stands for reason, autonomy, innovation, and nurture. Reason being that higher, more altruistic purpose of why your team exists beyond just making profit or growth. Autonomy and innovation work really well together. How do you give your team the freedom to make decisions, to execute their work, which often leads to innovation. And for me, innovation is like the key pillar for engagement, because without innovation, your company is stagnant. And so you want to get employees to that point where they are innovating either about product or just about processes and procedures, how to improve the customer experience. And then the last one is nurture. Nurture is around growth, is around how you handle the employee's long-term career, what are they looking to get out of the job. And that's something that most leadership programs solely focus on. But for me, you can't get roots on nurturing an employee until you've built an environment that they are highly satisfied and that they are feeling autonomous and innovative, and then they'll invest in themselves and the company for their own growth.
Well, that was what I was going to ask, is because as you were saying all these, I'm like, you were describing a very high functioning organization.
Yeah.
So which one, if I'm a leader and I'm coming into a situation that is not that,
yeah,
should I be focusing on engagement or satisfaction?
Satisfaction.
First?
100%.
Okay.
Because that's the foundation. So if you looked at a graph of Earth's terrestrial ecosystems, what you'll see is the line for precipitation goes up at a 45-degree angle.
Right.
Okay. There are no ecosystems that have high levels of rainfall and low temperatures. They don't exist. So much like your team culture, you can't have high levels of employee engagement and low levels of employee satisfaction. You need a foundation. And as you move across the ecosystems, as the potential for temperature rises, so does the potential for rainfall. And that's the exact same thing. So I would focus on satisfaction, especially that first pillar, which is tone, that safe, supportive, psychologically safe part of your environment. That gets you a lot of strong foundation in any team culture that you build.
So I don't know how much of the book you want to give away, because we want people to actually go out and buy the book.
Sure,
We definitely want that. And by the way, that chart is in the book itself. And
Yep.
and the producers love it when I say this. We'll make sure it gets into the show notes as well, because again, I have no idea how that actually happens. Let's walk people through the actual story then. Okay. At this point, so we've hinted at the fact that this is based in the multifamily world.
Yeah.
How do you walk someone through this journey in the book?
So in the book, Eliza Hawkins is a property manager. She's been a property manager for about 10 years, gone through her career, and she gets a new opportunity with a brand new company. She's taking on about
new to her, not a startup.
New to her, right?
Yeah.
Not a startup, sorry. New to her.
Yeah.
It's an established company. She gets the opportunity to lead an 800-plus unit property. She comes in, she's very excited. She realizes very quickly that this culture is a toxic one, that the employees not only don't get along, but they're almost like actively at each other's throats. The challenge financially is that people have been leaving, occupancy is slipping, they're missing budgeted target numbers, and so the need to correct it is paramount. Also, this is an established revenue juggernaut for the investment team who owns it.
Right.
And so they are freaking out as well. They had the previous manager who came in and basically tanked the team culture. People started leaving, people started moving out. It was a bad experience. So this Eliza Hawkins comes in and has to completely turn this around.
Something that none of us have ever experienced in the industry. A completely unique story.
Fictional story, right. And so Eliza realizes that she's in way over her head. So she goes back to her mentor, who was her former regional, and says, look, I don't know if I can do this. Can I have my old job back?
Right.
And she's like, no, sorry, I've already hired your backfill. She said, but what you need to really focus on is not just leading individuals, but leading the entire ecosystem of your team culture. That's where her mentor kind of rolls out this ecosystem framework, and pillar by pillar, she goes through it to turn that culture around. Now, I needed to have an extreme version of the team culture because a lot of times, and Eliza's mentor mentions this, you can shoot from the hip on some team cultures. You can be unintentional and things are fine and you kind of get things going. But when you're in a situation where it's like a really, really bad environment and you need to do a lot of work, this gives you the framework to be methodical and strategic about how you go about laying the foundation and turning around the culture.
Yeah, there's a number of things about the way that you portrayed the story that I thought was very astute to the way that multifamily works. Yeah. Number one, just the idea of, hey, I had to go to another company to advance my career because they're not going to build me a bigger, better property next door. Right. I think all of us at some level have experienced that, and it's a soapbox I've gotten on quite a bit recently because I think that model is in danger of breaking with standardization and centralization, et cetera. Yeah. But the other element that I absolutely loved about what you brought in was the idea of mentorship from someone who's not in the organization. Because this is such a small industry. It is the smallest multi-billion-dollar industry on the planet. And there are still folks that I have both a mentee and a mentor relationship that they're not here at LeaseLock with me, those things. So I love that element of leadership didn't have to necessarily fit within a hierarchy.
No. And that's kind of from my own experience and the experience of a lot of leaders that I talk to. At some point in your career, you find someone with whom you click, who takes an interest in you as a person and as a professional, and you tend to carry that person regardless of what company you're with. And so it was important for me to show you don't have to shift mentors every time you shift companies or jobs. Yeah. You can maintain that. Also, in some respects, leadership is leadership is leadership. You are in a different role at LeaseLock. If I were to move to a completely different company, I still rely on that same framework. So you carry a lot of these foundational elements of how you work as an employee, how you innovate, how you lead from job to job to job.
So I'm going to come back to the framework conversation because that was one of the things when we first started talking about it, was first reading the book, that really opened my eyes as to how to apply this. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to skip through the rest of the story. Okay. One of the things that you mentioned earlier with Eliza was that connection. You said you needed to connect and you have that connection in the industry. And I actually equate that back to a lot of what Eliza does through the book is as she's going, through the acronym, quite honestly, let's just be real. Yep. Almost every one of those approaches, if I remember correctly, started off with a connection with that associate that was dealing with that problem. Was that something you actually, because this is the first time I've really thought about this, was that something you truly intentionally, I'm assuming every word is poured over, I'm sure 1,000 times, but was that something when you started writing this that you intentionally set out to do was, put that people connection first?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. When I went about defining each character in the book, I started with what is their challenge in this environment? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a lack of confidence? Is it an overabundance of confidence? Is it they're in the wrong role? I went through and I had to define each one. And that's where it gave me an opportunity to illustrate how sitting down, talking with someone, asking questions is kind of that gateway to beginning any sort of leadership change that you want to make with a community. And that's something that I recommend in that first call to action section is before you do anything, before you change anything, have conversations, ask questions, and listen. And you're not going to figure out everything in the first week or two, but it gives you a nice start. And so, yeah, that human connection is paramount.
Yeah, no, it's again, I hadn't thought about it until you actually just saying that, but I think literally every chapter, if I remember correctly, does start with, because the way you did frame it was, each one of the characters, I may be wrong in this, I think every letter had a different character that was associated with that issue. None of it, did any of them have two?
Okay. Yeah, so the first chapter is tone, and there were just some general challenges around a couple of characters, how they talked with each other, how they talked to different people in that group. Enthusiasm kind of broke it up into a couple of different characters. Right. But there was definitely a focus so that there was a through line. So like when things did start to change in future chapters, you saw how earlier conversations that maybe took place within the satisfaction framework were influencing how Eliza was able to drive the engagement portion.
Yeah, so that does make a lot of sense. And when I think about the way you framed the storyline, and I'm curious if you think this is kind of the approach Bill really should take when they're entering in new situations, is Eliza didn't deal with, you're right, I really think about it, Eliza didn't deal with the individuals first. She dealt with the environment, for lack of a better term. The individuals are a part of that environment, and they're actually contributing to the overall ecosystem. Yeah. But really, right, that first one in tone was an assessment chapter. It was come in, assess the situation, realize that in that particular case, she had some pretty significant issues with the way the team worked together or didn't work together. Yeah. Then she went and, well, she tried to bail out, as you put out, and realized she's stuck. But then she went and found the right people to get the right advice from. And that wasn't her boss in this particular case. Why? Describe for me the relationship with her boss, because it wasn't a bad relationship. But
So
describe
her
that
boss
why
or her mentor?
Her boss.
Her boss. Yeah. Okay. So her regional manager at it's called Hamilton Property Company is the new to her company that she's working for, and her boss Bonnie is I think a recognizable archetype within the multifamily world. She's all business. She wants the results. At some point, she's, sacrificing team culture ideals in order to just
get a financial result.
Yep. And so it was important for me to have many adversaries for Eliza to be fighting against. And I wanted to create a realistic story because, as a leader, you're responsible for your team achieving results. Bonnie, who is Eliza's boss, is responsible for Eliza achieving those results. She's responsible to get that financial organization that owns the asset to meet their budget or exceed their budget. So that was just another, if I made the path too easy, if her direct supervisor was all like, yeah, Eliza, I love what you're doing here, rah, 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 there's not enough realistic conflict to kind of drive where she needs to go.
But I agree for the story part of it. I totally get that. But I did think it was, again, accurate to what a lot of people go through. Yeah. A lot of people will go into an environment where the only thing that matters at the end of the day for some is, did we hit the number that's on that budget so that ultimately we get that? And I found it interesting that you chose to do that really with the regional manager, not the asset manager. The asset manager had those same goals, but didn't have that same involvement in the storyline. Yeah. Which I found just interesting, because normally I hear that voice oftentimes from an asset manager, not necessarily the regional manager, because the regional manager is the one who is going to get, the employee phone call that goes past that, which actually happens in the book.
Yes.
And since we're on that one, let's talk about that, because one of the stories that I found really insightful and applicable to a lot of the situations I've been in. There's that one superstar. It's usually on the sales team.
Yep.
and they are just crushing numbers.
Yeah.
But they have the hard time really fitting into the rest of the organization because
Correct.
that organization, the rest of it, once it's past hitting their numbers, is it really a benefit to them? No knock on salespeople whatsoever, but that's how they're incented. That's what makes good salespeople often.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about how you had Eliza walk through that journey and how it ends up. Well, now let's say for how it ends up for people who want to buy the book.
Sure. So the character in this book is named Rachel, and she is, within the first couple lines of meeting her, you find out that she is in the Double Century Club, which is the 200 leases a year. Wanted to make her a really high achiever. The challenge is Rachel doesn't play well with others.
Right.
And so one of the things that I wanted to focus on with Eliza and kind of turning Rachel into more of a team player is being able to acknowledge Rachel's contributions to the team, but also set expectations about what success looks like through Eliza's eyes. Because for someone like Rachel and other salespeople who are singularly focused on their own success, that's what's been rewarded in the past, or those kind of behaviors have been either encouraged or just tolerated.
Right.
And so Eliza coming in and saying, you are crushing it with your leases, you are fantastic with your customers, where you're having challenges is the overall team dynamic. And by you not being a solid part of the team, you are actually negatively impacting other people's abilities to do their jobs or engage with customers. And so trying to communicate and show someone like Rachel, who is focused on being an individual contributor, how they fit into the larger team ecosystem in order to potentially change that behavior or at least soften it a little bit. And so that's how Eliza sat down and started that journey. It didn't go well at first. It took, the whole book before you started to see Rachel being a participant. And again, as a storyteller, I needed somebody. A funny story, in the original draft of the book, Eliza got her way and was able to get Rachel transferred to another property. And
Interesting.
Yeah, and my publisher was like, this is too easy. You can't do that. What would this story look like if she was stuck with Rachel? And so I went back and I wrote it that way. Because again, if I'm going for a realistic approach, you inherit team members and you don't just get to move them as needed. And
Well, that's interesting because I know a lot of organizations that, again, Rachel is a superstar in that organization.
Yes.
I know a lot of organizations that actually would have moved Rachel. They would have found another troubled property because they want to make sure she stays happy and sticks around and doesn't
This
bounce.
was the troubled property. She was at the troubled property. So losing a superstar from an already troubled property, you don't get to do that.
Yeah, no, I get it. But I mean, in today's world, like, and there's a reason that we're starting the LeaseLock Unscripted podcast focused on. This is all about, the P of the 4 Ps, the people P. We want to focus because it is the first and most important one. You can focus on process and product and all those things, but if you don't have the people right, you are not going to succeed.
Yeah. Well, and so this reminded me of a story about I was managing a property out in Fort Worth, and the company that I was working for thought someone who was really good at leasing could be unplugged from one asset and plugged into another, and off they would go, which there are people like that. But sometimes people's success is based on where they're working, who they're working for, the community. This person that I hired was a Fort Worth girl through and through, knew all of the downtown Fort Worth places to go, all of the fun. So when people came in to tour, there was an instant connection. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're gonna love this city. I love this city. I live in this city. And her closing ratio was fantastic. Now unplug her and put her in some place like Las Colinas, she loses all of her leverage of sales. So I often caution people, A good salesperson is not necessarily just good because they're good at sales. They're good because of what they're selling, where they're selling it,
Yep.
who they're selling it with.
It's interesting you have that as a story, because I'll relate one that's not my story, but I've heard him tell it several times. It's Darren Williams, he's the president of Portico, and he describes a very, very similar situation with a leasing agent here in DFW who was an absolute rock star at their uptown locations, the high rise, high end, all the things. And then they got a new jewel of the portfolio in a build to rent community that was out in the suburbs. And of course, they take the best person they have and they move him out there, and he falls flat on his face. He thought he was being punished because he's young, no kids, wants to live the uptown lifestyle, can sell that, can be able to relate to the people in there, and they plucked him and put him in the middle of Salina, Texas. And he fell flat on his face. So to your point, where's the environment someone goes into is actually a little more than just the team culture, isn't it? I mean, it could have been a great team culture, but that's not where they want to be.
Yeah, and that's where that's where the framework in the book is. That it's a framework. And so you, depending on your line of business, where you work, who you're working with, you can set that up in a way that might look very different from another manager, but following that same framework. And so it's not imagine, with apartment communities, imagine a new build, right?
Yeah.
What this book is, it's the studs, it's the wiring. You go in and you pick out what's the wall color, what do the countertops look like, what's the appliance package. That's on you as a leader, and that's where some of those individual skills that you gather come in. But the book, it's the sticks.
Yeah.
It's the foundation.
Yeah, it's going back to that framework. And again, this is one of my big aha moments the first time we were talking about the book and the framework was there are multiple different elements in the book that I can go, oh, that's where this part of 5 dysfunctions of a team would come into. Yeah. Or, oh, that's where I would have applied this lesson from 1 Minute Manager to reference books we've already been talking about through these. That was one of the things that I appreciated about it very, very much, was just like, okay, this is a different way to think about how to apply all of these other learnings that I've been gathering over the years as well. So framework, I think, is a very good way of describing that.
Yeah. That was the goal. I didn't want to create something that was in conflict with everything else. It was really just, here's your toolbox.
Okay.
You've got tools.
So we've talked a lot about the story. Obviously, it's set in multifamily, but this again, it's not a multifamily book. It's truly a leadership book. Correct. Who did you write the book for? Like, in your mind, who was that ideal audience?
Ideal audience was business managers, was property managers, because again, that's who the story is told through. Business managers, property managers are saddled with running a multi-million-dollar asset, and oftentimes are in a pocket of the company. They have to create their own team culture. They have to create their own success. And so for them, I thought a lot of companies don't provide resources on how to build team cultures, how to drive satisfaction and engagement. They don't have a lot of leadership training on an ongoing basis. So what I was trying to give them was really the framework that I had to figure out over years on my own. And hopefully, if we can shortcut some of that learning, then we save a lot of tears and a lot of expenses and a lot of employee turnover.
Yeah, and I think shortcutting the learning, and you and I were talking off air right before we got on, was that I think the way that we are raising community managers and leaders within multifamily is going to have to change.
Yes.
The operational model is changing so drastically that the old way, which by the way was never a good way, we take a leasing professional who's good at sales, pluck them out of that and lock them in a back room and make them do accounting functions as an assistant community manager.
Right.
And assuming they survive that, we then reward them by giving them, the keys to a multi-million-dollar asset without any real instruction on how to actually be a leader or run a business.
Correct.
So I'm kind of glad that is getting crushed, but it is that is going to have to change in the new operational model, which actually brings me to where you have taken the book now? You've taken the book, which is obviously a framework and a series of lessons, and you've developed a course off of it now, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's a day-long leadership class that goes through each of the pillars of satisfaction and engagement. The class right now is designed to either be in person or virtual. And there's lots of breakout sessions, lots of conversations with peers, lots of reflecting on how different elements of the framework can be utilized by you in your team cultures. And so it was important to me to take that next step in that development because I've had people who are on their own tagging the book, trying to implement that. And I thought, well, let me take it to this next level.
I don't know what you mean tagging the book. I have no idea. There's little flags in here.
I don't know if you know Kendra Butterfield at all.
Yeah.
But okay, so Kendra showed me her book and it puts that to shame. It's like,
I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, tabbed out like crazy, which is great. So it's people who want to have that framework, but don't want to do it in a silo. So this is going to be a very strategic day-long group exercise where you leave with your participant guide, your notes, and really action steps for yourself to go out and change your team culture.
Well, and I think the beautiful part about that is that then gives them the opportunity, again, to apply it to their specific situation.
Exactly.
You know, one of the things that as I was reading the book and thinking through it was, you know, it's not, yes, it's an acronym that's rain temp, but you as an individual might need to start on tone.
Yeah.
But it may also be that you need to start somewhere, you're at a spot where you can start an innovation.
Totally.
You know, where are those gaps on there? So I guess it's a weird question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyways. How would someone who is listening to this and asking themselves, okay, does a workshop apply to me? Like, is my organization a spot where it probably should invest in and get a workshop? What would be the signs that they would see to say, yeah, this would give us some benefit? And I realize I haven't asked this in advance, so maybe...
No, that's fine. I think the answer is it will. Like, if you're a leader, this is going to help you. Yeah. So I know that, you know, when I talk with people about the training program or the book, they say, well, who's this for? Like, what level of leadership? And I say, look, this is a foundational training. Yeah. It's not a beginner training. It's not for just new managers. It's a foundational training that can even help senior leaders. I've got a friend of mine who's a senior executive at a large banking organization. He read the book and he was like, it just helped me categorize things that I'm already doing into a clear strategic framework. And there were pillars that I went, oh my God, I'm not even focused on that. That's not something that I realized was impacting my ability to drive engagement.
Right.
Specifically around pay. Pay is a satisfaction pillar. And so now this individual has conversations with his directs about pay. Very blunt conversations. Are you happy with what you're making? If not, what are your financial goals and how can we get you there? Whether that's in your current role, in additional roles, I want to be very open and transparent with you about where you are at satisfaction-wise with your compensation, whether that's money, PTO, benefits packages. It gives him a clear insight to, are there any roadblocks to maximizing my employee satisfaction so that I can drive that employee engagement, which again is where autonomy and innovation live. So even for senior leaders, you're going to take things away that you're going to say, wow, I didn't realize that this may be impeding other things that I'm trying to do with my culture.
Well, and I'll echo that a little bit and expand it because again, I look at myself in a little bit of a weird spot where I'm in a leadership role, but I don't have a team that's reporting to me, kind of a thing. And I can think of two very specific examples very recently with the transition that I went through where I definitely fit it into this. You mentioned the pay portion of it. Yeah. Not to go into too many details, but like the structure of my incentive plan, I specifically asked for because I wanted it to fit within the particular tone of what I want to accomplish within the organization.
Sure.
The other thing I would say is, you know, when I actually came over here, one of the books that was recommended to me was Connectable, which is all about connecting into things. That absolutely, again, is in tone. We are a completely remote organization. And it's like, how do you connect in a completely remote world? But that goes straight back to what's the tone of the organization, how people go back and forth. So again, it's still weird for me to say that I'm in a leadership position for whatever reason, but I agree with you. It's not something that I love your approach. It's foundational. It's not basic.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good way of putting it. What do you think is, like, you've done a bunch of these podcasts now.
Sure.
Like, you've had a lot of conversations around the book.
Yeah.
What do you think is the point that people miss the most? Like, what's the thing people gloss over that you go like, I wish more people got that one?
Oh, that's a good question. I think what people miss the most is the amount of focus you need to put into your leadership, the intentionality that you need to put behind it.
Oh,
people look for a quick fix, and the book is not that. When you read the book, you'll see that the message that constantly gets talked about between Eliza and her mentor is your team culture doesn't always get fixed on the timeline you want it to or need it to. It takes time to invest, and it's always in flux, right? Simon Sinek had this great thing about you go to the gym one day, you don't notice a result. You go 2 days, you don't notice a result. A week, you don't notice a result. But after 3 months, you notice that result. It's a progressional thing.
Right.
And it changes. So what people, in this kind of quick fix world, people want to set it and forget it. You can't do that with leadership because things impact it. So for example, in the tech world, there have been a lot of layoffs, right?
Yeah.
When that happens, that impacts your ability to drive satisfaction and engagement with your team because it impacts the psychological safety of your employees. Regardless of where they are in the organization, regardless of how much maybe a rift makes sense financially for the group, it still scares people.
Yeah.
So you as a leader have to go, wow, the psychological safety of my team has just taken a huge downgrade, which again, according to that chart, means your engagement levels also drop.
Yep.
So now you have to walk in and go, all right, I have to be patient with things like innovation or things like people investing in their own career until I can build that back up. And it will take time and intentionality. So your team culture is constantly in flux depending on what's going on. Get a new leader, you get new goals, you have a reorg. All of those things knock your culture down a peg and then go back to the framework and say, where do I think this was impacted so you can focus in order to build back up?
I hadn't thought about it from that perspective of, hey, you've just gone through a major organizational change. Whether you consider that organizational change positive or you consider organizational change negative.
Sure.
You're probably right. In either one of those cases, you're probably going down. I'm going to use the evolutionary ladder at that point for it, or going up the evolutionary ladder. And again, going back to this as a framework to be able to leverage, okay, do I need to be focused more in temp or can I really be focused on rain? Is it more about engagement or is it about, the satisfaction, et cetera? So that's a really interesting framework. Because just a couple more things to go through on this, Jason, and then we'll wrap up and make sure people know how to get to the book, how to get contact with you, et cetera. I recently put out a LinkedIn post that was proposing, I'm sure you're familiar with the 4 Ps, and most people are, people, product, promotion, price. And I thought, I put up a nomination for a 5th, and that's process. So much of the way multifamily is changing does focus in on, okay, how are we doing X task with Z process? How do you think about the difference between leading process versus leading people? Where does leading a process and the change of the process fit within the Rainforest Team culture?
The main character, Eliza, in her leadership journey early on, often led processes instead of people, which meant if everyone was following the rules, everyone was doing the things they needed to do, she thought she was being successful. Where I see process, first of all, I'm a people over process as far as leadership goes. As a leader, my take on it is everything that you achieve is through your people.
Yeah.
Process is a way to support your people in getting done what needs to be done and reaching the targets and goals that need to be reached. It's a tool. It's like having a blueprint versus having a hammer. The blueprint is going to help you understand how to use the hammer. If it's the right tool for the job, that's the process. The process is the hammer. The blueprint is the people, the leadership framework, and that's how they fit in together.
The innovation. Yeah, and I think that's, again, there's so much focus right now on how do we fit artificial intelligence into it? How do we fit automation into it? How do we fit all these different frameworks? And obviously that's been a theme for the podcast for the last few episodes, and it will be in the next couple episodes as well. So that's why I was curious as to, and I think you were clear on it. It's like, it's people first. Like you've got to make sure that people are there and engaged regardless of what the process is. But then how do you fit the process to make them the most effective? And unless I'm reading something into you that you didn't, effective is not necessarily just did we get the most out of them.
Correct. So to piggyback on that, when you were talking about how do we fit AI, how do we do all these things, what I think is missing from a lot of companies in general, and this isn't even a multifamily thing.
Right.
Why are you in business?
Yes.
What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And if the answer is we want to grow to be the biggest or we want to maximize profit, you missed the point of the question. So often in multifamily, we say our job is to provide housing. Cool. Does this new technology fit into your ability to do that? And what does providing housing mean? Everyone needs housing, but what is kind of your elevated, more altruistic purpose for existing? Listen, I'm a capitalist through and through. Profit is the gasoline in the car.
Yeah.
But if you don't know where you're driving to, you're just burning gasoline for no reason. And so you need to decide, what is the ultimate goal of your company? Why does it exist? And if you can't articulate that as an executive, I would start there.
I love the way you just framed that. And I wasn't planning on giving a LeaseLock advertisement in this, but you've set a little bit of this up. And actually, it's one of the reasons that I made the decision I made to leave the company I was with to come over in that. And like the tagline for LeaseLock kind of summarized that. It's to eliminate deposits for good. And that good is actually across the resident base. It's across the teams who no longer have to administer a program like that. It's good for ownership because they get a bigger protection than what a standard deposit typically would be. But I think it's a good example of what you were just describing. Can you articulate the why before the how? I've been huge on why before how. Every salesperson who's worked with me is now cringing as they're listening to this because they've heard it 1,000 times. But that's the why.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's an antiquated model that actually didn't, the deposit model is an antiquated model that actually didn't protect owners with the way that they're utilizing it now, and was at the expense of the overall, cash flow of residents, where there is a better solution on the planet that does better for all. I hope that's a decent example of what you're talking about. Is like, great, can you articulate that? Not we want to get to X valuation so that there's some type of exit at some point. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. One of my favorite examples is Southwest Airlines. And as many challenges as Southwest has had in the past, their core mission remains true. We want to make travel affordable for as many people as possible. And the decisions that they put in place about not assigned seating, about different packages, about 2 free bags when you fly, these are not maybe smart financial decisions. They have an opportunity to grow their ancillary income if they started charging for bags. But their core mission is to make travel as affordable for as many people as possible. That's the lens through which they make decisions. And sometimes the decisions they make aren't the best financial decisions, but they're in line with their greater purpose, which is why Southwest, of all the airlines, has some of the most loyal customers you've ever met.
Yeah, I've got a great Southwest story that I'll tell you off air.
Okay.
And it involves a little bit about that. Like I actually had the opportunity to sit next to Herb Kelleher on a flight.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was a lot. And I will tell you, you talk about a culture.
Yeah.
I mean, he retired from the company at this point, but he was flying, if I recall correctly, we were going from Dallas Love to St. Louis, if I recall correctly. it was like there was a rock star at the gate when he was there.
Yeah.
And he made the rounds to every Southwest associate that was in or around the gate, making sure everybody knew who he was. Everybody just had smiles, and just, it was very clear that that culture, which we all know is that culture of love, that it's the LUV is their stock symbol.
Yeah.
But it was very clear. It started with him and just radiated from there. So I'll tell you the rest of that story about ancillary income in a little bit. So let's wrap this up with one that I'm kind of formulating to try and ask kind of all the guests. And I didn't warn you in advance that I'm going to do this one.
Is it my favorite swear word? Is that what you're going to?
No, but that would be a good one. That could be a good one. I'd probably get in a lot of trouble for that one, but maybe that's an off-air one. No, so I mean, what do you think? I mean, you've been in multifamily quite a while.
Yeah.
You have an interesting vantage point from it, from being outside of operations, but being able to look at, a very high level and thinking about people. What do you think is the biggest opportunity that multifamily has in the next, call it 18 months?
The next 18 months? Oh gosh, that's not a lot of time.
Okay, 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
I said, I'm working this question out. So
I think multifamily has an opportunity to define its role in society in the United States. Apartment rentals have become more popular among the younger generation. It's now a lifestyle choice that they're making. What does multifamily mean to the culture of the United States? What does living in an apartment mean to the United States? We know what being a homeowner meant, right? It was the American dream. That's how it was branded. What is the branding around multifamily in the culture of the US? We don't have one right now. It's kind of all over the place. It used to be apartments are affordable. If you can't buy a house, you should rent an apartment. Now it's a lifestyle choice. How are we branding ourselves as an industry to the general public? Because there's a lot of stories out there about what apartments are, how they function, what their role is. We have an opportunity as an industry to say, hey, this is how apartments fit into the fabric of the United States, of young people, of families, of maybe some of the financially disadvantaged. Like, we have that opportunity, and I don't know that we're actively seizing it.
I love that you picked this as an opportunity instead of a challenge.
No.
Because I think that right now it's framed for a lot of us in the industry as a challenge.
Yeah.
It is a challenge because the apartment industry to a great degree is under scrutiny.
Yeah.
And it is quite honestly under attack in my personal opinion. This we happen to be recording this the week of the NMHC fall meeting. On Wednesday, I'm flying out there where there's a lot of advocacy going on for the apartment community. So I love that you frame that as an opportunity, because I think you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about it from this perspective, but we do have the opportunity to help guide the narrative. Like, we're not going to create the narrative, but we have the opportunity to guide that broader narrative. And I'll quote Jay Parsons a little bit in, our good friend over at Madeira, and he's very much on the why do we vilify the renter? Like, why does the dream of home ownership always end up vilifying those who choose to live in rental housing for whatever reason, whether that is a financial reason or a lifestyle choice? So I love that as your opportunity, and I hope it takes us less than 36 months to do that. But
yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap this up a little bit. Where can people get a copy of the book? Where can they get a hold of you if they want to know more about potentially doing a course on it for their organization? How do people get a hold of you?
So the book is available at my website, jasonkae.com, or it's available.
And it's Kae, right?
Kae, yep. Correct. Maybe we'll put a little banner on the bottom.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know what? I'm sure the guys in post will do that.
For those just listening. And you can also reach me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there and respond to my messages. But the book is on Amazon. It's available in paperback, digital, and audio and Audible. Which, if you haven't listened to it, you've got to listen to it. I hired an actor out of LA to voice it for me, and she did an amazing job of getting that done. For the course, so I'm in talks with some apartment associations, with some smaller companies about running some pilot sessions of this training program. right now where I'm at, because I understand we need proof of concept in the world, you can get me to come out to your organization for an extremely discounted rate because I want to show you the value that this will bring to your organization. So for Q4, Q1 of next year, it's really about me getting in front of as many people as possible. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. There's a contact page on my website as well. Get me in front of 10 to 15 of your managers and let me show you what this foundational training can do as far as them being able to drive employee satisfaction and engagement, but also giving you a common language among all your leaders as far as driving team cultures.
Oh, I love it. Well, Jason, I'm a fan, obviously. I appreciate it. I've dog-eared my copy and got the stuff in there. I hope everyone goes out and does get a copy of it, but I appreciate what you're doing and bringing this type of leadership development into the multifamily space. Appreciate you.